Humans and chimps separated probably about 5 million years ago, and climate change is going to obliterate its alpine habitat. We found these crazy animals that have huge scimitar-like claws.
There's a lot we don't know about human evolution. In this episode, we'll explore our origins and what the future might hold for our species. Big questions, no easy answers. Dive into the mysteries of the universe with Unknowns. From the secrets of the Big Bang to the future of humanity. Discover what we still don't know. Tune in and explore the unknown. Hi, I'm Kim Lochner and I'll be your Unknowns guide. Our host is David Christian, a historian, the founder of Big History, and the host of the Unknowns podcast. And our guest today is Michael Archer, a paleontologist and evolutionary biologist in the School of Biological, Earth and Environmental Sciences at the University of New South Wales in Sydney. And his list of awards and accomplishments is particularly impressive. Before we get into everything that we don't know about the origins of humans, can you tell us about the ways that humans are similar to other organisms? Or how do we fit into life in general? You use this fascinating term, the bioblob, about how we're connected to all life on Earth.
I'm going to claim that one. I actually developed that whole idea while I was teaching first-year biology students to just communicate the sense not about how we're different from everything else. We used to tell students, how do you tell a crustacean from a crab or from a starfish? I wanted them to focus on what's the unity of life? What is it that binds us all together? And I thought hard about it, and that's why I came up with this idea. And I think it is so important. I've amazed myself, I now believe it totally, that there is only one organism that has ever been on planet Earth. And it started out 3.5 billion years ago as a little cell. And then over time, this cell began to proliferate and differentiate and become all kinds of other things. When you think about the way we look at life now, or anything, frankly, we look at it in terms of length, width, and height, the 3 dimensions. That's the way we define everything. That's why we see ourselves as different. You're not the same as me, because I can see how you're confined and how I'm confined. But there's a 4th dimension that we forget about, and it's time. And time defines everything as well. Everything is defined in the 3 dimensions plus time. And if you could see time, and we can't, unfortunately, we see the other dimensions, but not time. If you could see it, look back through time, every cell of your body, we would find actually was physically connected to the cells that came before you. And so on ad reductium, all the way down, right to that first cell 3.5 billion years ago. This is the bioblob. It's a 4-dimensional, time-traveling, shape-changing, incredible thing, like a gigantic amoeba crawling its way through space and time with tendrils coming out. And we're one of those little tendrils in the area of mammals that we call primates, and within that tendril are other little tendrils. And this is the hominins, and we're very closely related to chimps. This is one of the things we understand. But again, recognizing the chimps are not different than us because they're connected in time back to us. It's the same blob, just with slight differentiation here. So we are certainly part of the bioblob, and it's a really important thing.
So does that mean we're a bit like leaves on a tree? You know, the leaves may fall off, but the tree, and when we're alive, we're just a part of the
That's
tree.
exactly right. You could think about a tree or a giant amoeba, and this tree has lots of branches, and the branches have more branches. But if the tree is, in fact, 3.5 billion years old, like the bioblob, it's a very old tree. But yes, it's a good metaphor to sort of think about it that way. The tree, like shedding its leaves, the bioblob sheds bits of itself. And these fall in the mud all around the bioblob, and they become the fossils that I study. And we use those fossils then to try to reconstruct, well, what did the tree look like back in time?
Well, so let me shift to your own research, which is about, I guess, earlier stages in the life of the bioblob. Your research, you focus mainly on the evolution of Australian species. What factors seem to have had the greatest influence on the evolution of new species, new parts of the bioblob? And specifically, how important would you say geography is in those processes?
Oh, yeah. Geography is tremendously important. When you think about Australia, I love Australia. The geography aspect of Australia is fascinating. 50 million years ago, Australia was still attached to Antarctica. and Antarctica was attached to South America, and so on. The whole world was an interconnected series of continents, and you could walk right across these continents. But 50 million years ago, Australia got wanderlust, and it decided to break away from this party, and it moved slowly away from Antarctica until, at just about 50 million years, it separated. But that meant 50 million years of developing extraordinary animals that could not get anywhere else in the world, and nothing else in the world could get to Australia. So we became a second natural laboratory. It's kind of like if we want to understand what were the evolutionary processes that happened in other parts of the world, Australia is a kind of a second chance to see how these same things might have happened in an isolated part of the world.
How much of the process of evolution is serendipitous, and how much is in some sense steered? You've talked a bit about how geography may sort of steer some processes.
Yeah, you're asking a really fascinating question, and I wish I knew all the answers to that. And we don't. Certainly geneticists and paleontologists have all conspired to try to resolve the question that you're asking and figure out, what is the answer? We think it's possible. An example, we have in Australia something called the marsupial mole. And it really looks like a mole. It's a beautiful golden color. You only find it in the Australian deserts. It's blind. It has no external ears. It is so spectacularly specialized for living in sand. And yet, you look at south in Africa, there are things called Cape Golden moles. And these are so amazingly similar that they have challenged evolutionists to think, how could this happen? And the question is, are they both so similar because they are both perfectly adapted to working through sand? Is it that the sand shapes the mole, or the mole has just independently become like this?
That means, is the landscape or the geography steering evolution in a very quite tight sense? Is the question you're raising.
Yes, that would be one possible explanation, and we'd need to find out. In fact, that's the usual one people come up with, is that this is convergence. Convergence driven by animals adapting to similar conditions in different places. But it's also possible that there's an entrained genetic part here, that maybe once you start down a certain path, becoming a certain kind of an animal, it's not so much serendipity. Genetics may be controlling the next steps because there may be only so much resilience in the genome that says you can't become anything from a particular starting point. Once you start down a particular path, you may have to keep going on that path because of the way the genetics of our organisms are established.
Actually, the metaphor of your bioblob as a tree would point you in that direction, wouldn't it? It would say you're out on one limb, you can't suddenly pop up on another limb at another part of the tree.
And although you can have your limb end up looking very similar to another limb, but it actually is a similarity not based on common descent. You've independently become similar. There's so many questions here we don't have the answers to.
And these questions, all of them, apply to questions about human evolution. If someone asks you the question, why did humans evolve the way they did? Part of the answer is going to be, we don't know, mate.
I wish that we had more time in Australia to look at what Australia was going to do before humans came along and mixed up all the faunas. Because you look at, you think, well, if humans do annihilate themselves, what's the next species off the rank that's going to start to dominate the world?
Cockroaches.
Well, that's another possibility. But you think about, what is it about humans we think of as special that makes us, that's maybe given us this evolutionary advantage? One is grasping hands. Other is bipedality. So we freed our arms to do sorts of things, stereoscopic vision. And then suddenly you look around Australia and say, hey, kangaroos are bipedal. Hey, kangaroos have grasping hands. They have stereoscopic vision. Are they going to take over the world? And, if we'd had enough time, would that happen? Would kangaroos become the next sentient dominant animal on planet Earth?
In what ways are we humans different from other species? And then let me give you the next question immediately, which is, what evolutionary processes might have directed us in these ways?
Very good question, David. We're in another area where we're not certain exactly what happened. We wish we had a time machine so you could go back and actually see what happened. On the bioblob, humans and chimpanzees are very close together. In fact, we share 98.8% of our DNA with chimpanzees, very close. That's as close as horses and zebras are to each other, and they hybridize. They can mix their genes up. So we're so close to chimpanzees. And yet, despite this genetic similarity, we don't look like chimps. There's lots of differences. We walk upright. We have incredibly long lifespans, gigantic brains. But our brains are 3 times the size of chimpanzees. So while we're very closely related to them, we don't look like them. And for all these weird reasons. And coming to your second question, is there an evolutionary process we can think of that might have triggered a lot of this? And there is, and it fascinates me. Humans may have become neotenized. We may have become sexually mature as in a baby body form, a baby chimp body form. And that would explain a lot of the physical appearance, the differences from chimpanzees and us.
Am I right in thinking that very small genetic changes could have radical implications for the development of a species?
One mutation in a rate-controlling gene could do this, just one mutation. So yes, it's a simple process, and it could have been just an accident at some point in the evolutionary history of humans that some group of chimps had that mutation, and all of a sudden, their body form was transformed. As long as it wasn't disadvantageous, as long as it didn't hurt them in some way, it could have locked in because there are so many benefits that come from these differences that neoteny would have brought, including this extraordinary thing of a very large brain.
But there's a cost to be paid, isn't there, for having a big brain? I mean, is that one of the reasons why so many species, I think, not just chimps, it's as if their genes stop the brains getting too big?
Yeah. When you think about it, when a baby chimp is born, and it's about a 9-month gestation for a baby chimp, it pops out, and man, it's running around, it's pulling its father's ears and, teasing other animals. It's ready to go. It's a functional animal. What happens to our babies when they're born? They're like human larvae. They just lie there on the ground, and all they can do is poop and scream. They can't do anything. What's the advantage? What's the offset against all the disadvantages of having this big brain? It's learning. We are preeminently a learning species, and it's an amazing device we've got. If you take it to your own life, you realize, when is the best time to try to learn a new language? It's like when you're 1 or 2 or 3, you'll start to pick that stuff up like a rocket. It's when we're young, we assimilate information like a sponge, and that could have been extremely important in the evolutionary race for humans.
You invest a lot of, actually what you invest to the large brain is energy, isn't it? It's because you need a huge amount of energy for that brain.
Yes.
But then you get stuck and a long childhood, so the parents have to be involved, and then suddenly you discover there's a payoff because this thing is very clever.
Absolutely.
Now, in Big History, we use the phrase collective learning. One of the arguments that we explore in Big History is the idea that this ability to learn together may be one of the keys to our power. And I'd like to talk about our power later on. But that depends so much on language. How much do we know about the evolution of human language?
We don't. I mean, there are major raging battles among anthropologists wondering which of our ancestors could actually talk. Could a Neanderthal actually speak? And we don't really know. It's all hinging on looking at details of the anatomy of the skull to try to figure out whether the hyoid bones are well enough developed. All kinds of things you have to solve before you can speculate about that. But the bottom line is we don't know. What we do know is that clearly Neanderthals had a splendid imagination and were busy making drawings. They were sort of painting things on cave walls, pictures of animals. In a sense, even if they weren't as fluent as maybe we are in terms of vocal communication, they could still give pictograph instructions to youngsters. If you want to kill a mammoth, here are the points, and you show in the drawing, where do you put the spear in order to slow down the mammoth? So there may have been many other ways, even if our ancestors couldn't communicate verbally, to be able to communicate with pictures, sign language, and even maybe while you're out in those situations, you can do hand signals. We know, for example, this fascinates me, there is a bonobo, one of the, there are 3 chimps where it's argued we're one of the chimps because we're so close to the other 2. So there's a common chimp, a bonobo, and then the human chimp. There is a bonobo named Kanzi, and I know there's a lot of argument about this and debate, But it's claimed that Kanzi actually, using hand signals and so on, is aware of 3,000 different human words and can even put some of these together into simple sentences. I'm sure this is going to be debated for a long time about whether this is really happening. But if it is, it suggests that it's not just humans that probably have this capacity to communicate with each other. Here's a bonobo showing the capacity to do it if induced down that path. When you think about this, humans and chimps separated probably about 5 million years ago. And between the last ancestor that we shared with chimpanzees are a lot of fossil humans. So they're even more likely to have been able to do this. So I think although we don't know for sure, language, as you say, is probably been for a long time one of the most important glues and levers and instigators of the management humans have managed to achieve over the whole of life.
So we know that lots of species can communicate. I mean, I've been reading a lot recently about whale song, but it's as if humans, I don't know, it seems to me the word threshold that we use in Big History is appropriate here, that it's as if humans acquired the ability to communicate on such a scale and so fluently that the mass of information they could accumulate about the world increased. And with more information, you can fiddle around more with the world around you.
It is fascinating. But, there's a caveat on all this about the richness of verbal communication. But, there's a game we used to play as kids. You'd have a group of people and you'd tell one person in the circle a story, whisper a story in their head and ask them to pass on the story. And by the time the last person gets it, it bears almost no resemblance to the first person's story. I think what backs up this and cements it and makes it a building block that language can continually augment is writing. When you start to actually write down what you're trying to communicate, then it's less likely to have a life of its own and evolve in its own way. It'll stay closer to what the original message was. So when writing started, that was a second level, another threshold, I think, as you say, where communication suddenly launched and took a huge leap.
So we're talking about leaves right at the edge of the bioblob. And can we talk about some of the ones that are closest to us? How close are we to other hominin, or should I say hominid species?
Hominids is better. Hominids actually includes the great apes, the gorillas, the chimps. So within that group, hominins are the smaller group that are more human-like. It's about a 5 or 6 million year old part of the bioblob. And how close are we to the various parts in
say Neanderthals?
Yeah, Neanderthals are a very good example. And they've been argued about for so long. When we first discovered Neanderthal skulls, they looked so unusual, gigantic beetly brows and big jaws and sloping foreheads. They thought, this isn't Homo sapiens. This can't be our species. So they were given a new species name. The game has moved on, and now we're not so sure, because it now turns out that something like 6% of the DNA of Europeans is actually Neanderthal DNA. So
6%.
we've now 6%. So nobody can say anymore that Neanderthals are different than us. Actually, they live within us. Even many of the Southeast Asian peoples and Australians and New Zealand, a lot of these people have about 4% of another hominin, the Denisovans, a new group we've discovered recently, an extinct group of humans, and yet their DNA appears to have still persisted in a lot of the peoples in Southeast Asia. So did these species become extinct or simply absorbed by us? What we do know for sure is they were hybridizing. Humans are mischievous things. All the hominins seem to have occasionally thought, I like that one over there, or not so much that one over there. So there was a lot of intermingling, a lot of genetic mixing, and that accounts for how come a lot of the DNA of what we otherwise previously assumed were extinct hominins are actually still within us. It's complicated stuff.
Now, I think I said at the very beginning of this discussion that my own belief is that it is appropriate to say that as a species, we humans are perhaps collectively the most powerful species that has ever existed. I don't think we know of a single species. We know of groups of organisms that have changed the climate and the geology of the Earth, but never a single species. Now, if that's true, what forces do you think drove us in that direction? This is coming back to this question of, is serendipity involved, or can we identify forces that made us powerful?
Yeah. I think the ultimate explanation surely has to swing around the brain. The brain is suddenly capable of understanding and investigating, experimenting, all kinds of things that maybe other animals never thought to try. The brain is kind of like out in front of our body. It's exploring possibilities. And when you think about it, you add that gigantic brain and its capacities to these manipulative hands, the ability to sort of manufacture things. And all of a sudden, there's human beings on the moon. But equally, there's human beings developing atomic bombs ready to turn us all back into dust again.
Yeah.
So there are trade-offs here that are really interesting. But there are a lot of things the brain has done that has catapulted humans into this position of dominance on planet Earth. Certainly one of them was we're starting to control the flow of energy on the planet. I mean, it's quite extraordinary.
On the whole planet.
On the whole planet. And then we didn't stop at that. The brain said, well, what is it that wipes out humans normally? And the answer is, you get too many humans in one area, more than the food supply is available to keep those humans alive. So humans start to die, just like happens in any other mammal population. Kangaroos can reach 50 million in a good year, and half of them will starve to death during a drought. This is what controlled us naturally. And suddenly, 10,000 years ago, that brain suddenly said, well, why do we have to wait for natural resources to appear for us to eat? Why don't we make more? And agriculture began.
And change the environment so that it produces more of the stuff we want.
And from my point of view, as somebody who loves biodiversity on planet Earth, it was the worst thing that could have happened, because we discovered we could sweep all the biodiversity of any area aside and plant just a few things we're interested in, grow just a few animals we want to eat. And all of a sudden, the rest of the world is struggling to keep up with what now is us using 30% of the total productivity of planet Earth for our own good.
Just to grow the stuff that we humans happen to like.
And now we're about to hit 11 billion people. How are we going to do this? This is a worrying thing to me. We need all the brains of every bright person coming along to start to focus on this problem.
Can I ask one clarification? I remember a student once, I was talking about the importance of the brain, and a student once saying to me, but isn't an elephant's brain much bigger than a human's brain? So in what sense?
A Neanderthal's brain?
And a Neanderthal's brain is bigger than our brain. It is
bigger,
but an elephant's or a whale's brain is much, much bigger than ours. So in what sense are our brains
That's a really good question.
big?
So what is it about the human brain that made this difference? I don't know. Look, we've got to think about this carefully. And here we are extolling all the virtues of the giant human brain and all the wonderful things it's done and the risks. But we've only been around for 300,000 years. That's all. That sounds like a lot. But the average mammal, when we look back down on the bioblob, on the branches of all the other mammals, most of those branches have a lifespan of about 3 to 5 million years before they diverge into something else. So those were successful branches that produced more branches. We're a branch that's only been around for 300,000 years. And the question is that a successful branch? We're doing all these things to the world, which are pretty scary. We're busy developing devices to kill ourselves. We're really pushing the limit here. And you have to ask the question, can we say that big brains are really an asset? Are they a great thing to have, or are they potentially an evolutionary liability? They got us to where we are now, and we've done some amazing things. And we hope if a green-eyed, tentacled Martian ends up, or Venusian ends up looking at the record here in Australia, they'll say, wow, look what this species did. But I worry that by the time they come to sort of say hello, we're gone because we may have annihilated ourselves. I mean, it's kind of a terrifying thing. There is a physicist friend of mine who's speculated about the big brain question, and he wondered, is it inevitable that animals that have largish brains, like the dolphins or like the elephants, so on, will go on to develop bigger and bigger brains over time, just like humans did? While we don't see that necessarily happening, we have seen growth. There's a brain war that's going on in animals. I love this one, that the herbivore brains over time, over the last 60 million years, in, say, the horse line, have gotten bigger over time. And it's really bigger to get slightly better at evading the lions that are chasing them all the time. And then you see each time the herbivore brain gets a little bit bigger, the lion brains are getting a little bit bigger. So this is a brain war.
Brain arms race.
Yes.
Yeah.
But would we see another animal do what we've done? And this physicist said to me, he doubts it, because after all, Africa is not an isolated place in the universe. It's one continent on Earth, and there's 7 other continents that have had animals of all kinds evolving in it. None of these other animals have gone down the same kind of path that humans have done. So he's saying if it's an evolutionary inevitability that brains in animals keep getting bigger until we get proto-humans or pseudo-humans elsewhere, why hasn't that happened before? And he's wondering if we might not have to chalk up the development of the human brain as a colossal serendipitous accident.
Well, I can think of another reason why that might be true, which is that it's not just that our brains have given us a slight advantage over other people. I mean, the differences between our power and those of chimps are staggering. So something really big happened as a result of those big brains. It's not just a slight incremental improvement.
And yet, to the extent that chimpanzees do have large brains, and they do have large brains, they exhibit some of the same behaviors that have enabled humans to capitalize on a big brain, that is, working as troops. I mean, the ordinary chimp actually engages in war, but they don't do it until they have made a determination that the tribe they're going to go after has less chimps in it than their chimp. As soon as they make that decision, then they go to war, and all terrible things happen. It kind of makes you think, is that a little glimpse at what some of our ancestors might have done as we began to discover what we could do with these big brains?
Can I go back to the idea of mystery? I mean, these unknown podcasts are all about, well, we've been touching on many aspects of human evolution that are mysterious. So can I ask you to summarize what, in your view, is the most mysterious aspect of the evolution of our species?
Yeah, David, I guess there's an awful lot of mysterious things about evolution, the evolution of humans that fascinate me. But there is one that I find particularly amazing, and it's being explored a lot by a very interesting philosopher who says, what is it that separates the way we think about the world, about how we use this brain to sort of conceptualize how we fit within the world? And he makes that very interesting point, which I think he's spot on with, and that is that unlike all other animals who relate to the world in its reality, they relate to the rocks, to the water, to the trees. Their world is made up, and each other. The world is made up of real, tangible things. And he says humans actually seem to be leaving this behind. We live in a world of beliefs that we've created. We've imagined things that don't exist in the real world, and yet we've insisted on living within these imaginations. An example, we invent money. Money is a piece of paper. And, why would anybody think they would give you lots of goods for a piece of paper? And yet, because everybody believes this, and it's a belief that spreads through the whole community, it works. And we can use it as an exchange that bonds us all together. Even countries, when you think that countries do not exist, there's no physical entity of a country. We've drawn lines on the map and said, this is a country. It's an artificial construct. It's an imagination. And yet, our whole world, our whole human interactions is based on the assumption that countries are real. Companies, there is no such thing you could hold in your hand as a company. It's an arrangement agreed to by a whole lot of people who agree to do a particular type of activity, and they work together to do it, and that makes a company. And yet companies are capable of running the world. They're getting so big, and yet they don't exist. They're imaginations. So I think this is one of the most mysterious things about humans is we've created an imaginary bubble world in which we live. Is this a bad thing? I don't know, really. It helped us in some way.
Seems to work.
It seems to work.
A lot of the time, yeah.
No, and every now and then it really goes awry. For most of the time, if people play the game and everybody does agree to play the game, then it does work. It's a bit like Bitcoins and things that, as long as everybody agrees that it's worth money, then it is. And although, with my accent, I sort of hate talking about American presidents at this point. But on the other hand, there was a great one, James Garfield. He was the 20th president of the United States. He was a fascinating man. He was fascinated by history, which would interest you. He died early, unfortunately. But before he did, he came up with a wonderful statement. He said, the past is but the unrolled scroll of prophecy. And what he was saying was, in his understanding of history and his fascination with it, if you want to understand a particular event in history that happened, a world war or some major discovery, you needed to go way back in time before that event and study all the events that contributed to leading up to that particular outcome. And he said, really, in order to understand what's going to happen into the future, you need to go as far back in the past as you can pick those dots in time and start to draw lines through them right into the present and let those lines then start to project into the future. So he's saying if you want to predict the future, if you want to be better able to deal with what's coming, use the past to help you. And I'm doing this, for example, in our fossil work in the Riversley World Heritage Area. We've discovered that a critically endangered mammal today, the mountain pygmy possum, lives in the alpine areas of New South Wales and Victoria. It's going to go extinct. There's only 1,500 of these animals left, and climate change is going to obliterate its alpine habitat. But we've been listening to Garfield's wisdom and decided to understand how did that situation come to be. And we've gone into the fossil record, gone way back to 25 million years, and charted the ancestors of all of the animals that led up to the one that's sitting up there shivering in the alpine zone today. What we found was that's not the habitat they normally lived in. They normally lived in lowland rainforest, and they followed the rainforest in a previous climate change bout up the mountains, and then with climate change again got stranded there. That's not their happy zone. Their happy zone would be back in those lowland rainforests. So we've used that understanding, Garfield's wisdom, to say, let's trial this. So we've now got animals from the alpine zone. We built a breeding facility in a lowland area, and as we predicted, they're adapting incredibly well to the lowland areas. The next stage will be to start to trial release them into their ancestral habitat. So the answer to all these people that like to know, what do you get out of this? For me, it's to say the past is definitely the most important thing you can study if you want to predict what the future is going to be like. We have another example like that in Riversley where 15 million years ago, and this will sound familiar, global temperatures went up 2 degrees centigrade. That's what we're confronting right now. And everyone's saying, what's going to happen? What's this going to mean for us? And everybody's running around scared because we don't really know. But it happened before. And we've got a fossil record that has all of these ancient communities bracketing this rise in 2 degrees centigrade. So we can say, what was it like before that happened? What happened when that temperature rise occurred? And what happened after the temperature fell again? And I know what it is, and it's pretty worrying. We lost 25% of the species in those environments for every 1 degree centigrade rise. So what's going to happen now? We've got a prediction.
So if going into the past is absolutely vital for helping us prepare for the future, then doesn't it make sense to look at the whole of the past?
Oh, I completely
Which is what
agree.
Big History does.
And you're doing it wonderfully, David. Thank you very much.
Final question, really. What are the kinds of questions you're trying to solve in your own work?
Another whole arena that we're working on is trying and I mentioned this before, trying to see if we can get animals that are extinct back to life again. I've started this with the Tasmanian tiger, the thylacine.
That's fascinating, because I've always thought this was kind of science fiction, but you're saying, no, this is serious science.
Take Jurassic Park seriously.
Yeah.
Okay, there's a lot of silly things in the movie, but it triggered a lot of people to think about it. And certainly I started to wonder whether the Tasmanian tiger, this wonderful king of beasts that was in Australia, which we exterminated in 1936. The last one died in a zoo in Hobart. And it was all humans that did this. Could we bring that back? And when I first asked that question years ago, geneticists said, that's ridiculous. Dead is dead. Extinction is forever. I'm not good at believing that just automatically. So when I started working with a pickled pup that we found, it had been collected in 1866, when I was director of the Australian Museum, we put a team together and started to look in that pup, and we found DNA. And we started to find nuclear genes and mitochondrial genes, and the genome was there. We couldn't keep the project going because the DNA wasn't top quality, but clearly it was there. Now, other people have picked up that project in the University of Melbourne, and Andrew Paskin team have started to work with better genomic material recovered from these pickled pups. And they now are saying, and they've got a $15 million research support to make this happen. They expect to have the thylacines back, loving and licking us again in maybe 10 years. And I just want to be around to be the first one to pat one when it comes out. Certainly one of the shocking things that people find hard to believe is the possibility we're doing research and trying to bring extinct animals back to life. But I think that's not the part that amazes me so much. It's some of the things we're finding in the Riversley World Heritage fossil deposits that just knocked us out. It turned what used to be jokes into reality about things that were in Australia. I mean, we'd make jokes about drop bears, right? You know, these crazy animals supposedly in Australia.
Drop bears.
Drop bears.
Yes.
You know, that land on you if you're not looking up and then tear you apart. Well, we found drop bears in the fossil record. We found these crazy animals that have huge scimitar-like claws that we now understand because we have whole skeletons of these things. They're 15 million years old, and they weren't on the ground. They were in the trees above. There were herds of these animals running in the trees above, and occasionally they lost their grip, fortunately, because they ended up as fossils in caves below, and fell out of the trees. So there were drop bears with these. And in fact, we just recently found the skeleton of a giant snake. We had the biggest python in the world coming out of these deposits. It's about 10 meters long. And in amongst the giant bones of this thing are the claws of these drop bears. So we can almost imagine a sort of a huge, horrendous battle that went on between these two.
I have to admit that I'm quite happy that drop bears and giant pythons are no longer wandering in the Australian bush. But I am fascinated about bizarrodonts and weirdodonts. Check out more of our mysterious topics in the next episode when we talk about some of the amazing origin stories and mnemonic techniques used by Indigenous storytellers. Check out the other episodes of Unknowns, where we explore mysteries and questions about our origins and our future. Interested in learning more about Big History? Check out the Big History Project, a free online course for middle school and junior high students.